Welcome to The Collective, where every conversation ignites a new perspective. Join us as we delve into the journeys of remarkable individuals, explore the art of growth, resilience, and the power of a shared mission as we strive to be better together. Hey everybody, welcome back to The Collective. We have another fantastic show for you planned out today, and I am pumped. We're going to be talking about black belts and what that means and how it applies to things, and I'm just stoked. But while I am stoked, y'all should be too. Do the things, like the show, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bells, do all that good stuff, get your emails whenever we go live, which of course Fridays for The Collective and Wednesdays for The Gold Mine. Before we get too deep into the conversation though, let's get some intros out of the way and then we can dive right in. Todd, you're the newcomer here. Why don't you give me 10, 15 seconds? Who are you? Where you come from? All that good stuff.
10, 15 seconds. Started karate at 15. I'm just about 50. And so I've been training ever since and began my jiu-jitsu journey in 2011 under Hoist Gracie Club in Surrey, BC.
Bam. I like it. Mark, how about yourself?
I'm Mark Hamlyn. I started my martial arts journey in the age of 13 in Fort McMurray. I trained judo until I went away to university. And then when I moved back to Fort McMurray, I started my karate journey, and that would be like 2000 or so, which is when I met Todd, and I continued to train in karate until obtaining a knee dan, second degree black belt. That was in 2010 when I moved away from Fort McMurray, and at that point, I transitioned to training jiu-jitsu under Silvio Bering, Mike Yakulik, and Ryan Timofey, which is where we met. And I've been training jiu-jitsu ever since, where I obtained my black belt in 2022.
Bam. And it was a very, very nice demonstration, by the way. I was there.
Thank you so much. Involved me getting thrown a lot.
Why don't you give us a breakdown of your martial arts background as well?
Yeah, I started really young. I was 3, but I didn't do anything serious until I was a teenager, really. So being in martial arts and being in martial arts are two different things, as it turns out. I started in Wushu and I did Muay Thai. I sort of transitioned into Muay Thai in my teenage years, traveled all over to do that. Eventually sort of switched over into Lavoie when I was on the teams. And in 2007, I started my Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu journey. And so got my black belt in 2021. And yeah, that's it for me.
Bam. I would have loved to see that demonstration. That would have been awesome. Todd? Why don't you give us a breakdown of your martial arts career?
So I started martial arts when I was a teenager, but a late teenager, just maybe a year or two before I graduated high school. And then, to make a very long story short, because it's been over 40 years of martial arts, I've done a few things in a few different styles. None of it particularly impressive from my end, but the things that I've engaged in have been impressive in the styles that I've considered. As an example, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is amazing, but I'm not amazing in it. So I've done a lot of different amazing martial arts, but I haven't really measured up to anything that I would suggest is notable. But perhaps nothing specific notable, but maybe what is notable is how long I've been doing it and consistently pursuing the martial art way rather than a martial art.
The concept of being a martial artist versus just studying a martial art. I like that. Myself, I haven't done a ton. I did some wushu as well, Seb, which is always super fun. I do really miss doing that style. It was really interesting, but not as effective as BJJ has been for my life just recently. And I just, Rob has been working with me on some Muay Thai for the last little while, so that's been super fun. And yeah, I'm excited to get into this conversation. So the real question that got this conversation started was, what makes a black belt? What makes a black belt, really? Because it stemmed from Islam's comment that he'll be the one that decides who is black belt or not. And we all decided that this would be a good conversation to dive into. So go right off the top. Mark, I'm going to hit you first. What makes a black belt a black belt?
Well, I think it's like, what is I think it's a frame of reference kind of conversation. So there's like a club black belt, which is what I would consider myself, is I wouldn't say recreational or hobbyist, probably something beyond that. But that level of where I'm teaching, I'm helping to teach kids. I've studied to a level where if your particular academy or school has some kind of curriculum that says, if I can do these things to a certain prescribed level, we would consider this what we look for in a black belt. That's part of it, but the real essence of what a black belt is to me is somebody who is able to describe the technique, demonstrate the technique, and then teach the technique to a level that we would consider what a black belt should look like. And I think it varies from place to place and all that. But that's sort of that type of black belt. A competitive black belt, like, because there's some people that compete like a lot in whatever association, or like even just the IBJJF or whatever you're competing in, or if you're competing in some kind of real combative arena like the UFC or any of those similar type spaces, that is a little bit different. Do I think I could beat Islam Makhachev? I absolutely don't. But I still don't think that invalidates in any way the black belt that I've got or anybody else's black belt. And I don't necessarily think that's what he was saying, because there was a little bit of posturing within the combat sports arena that's sort of important to how that is done. It's part of being a competitive athlete there. But I think there are certain people in certain schools that we would maybe call the McDojos of the world who would think, well, I could beat him. I'm choosing not to because I'm here teaching kids, but I could take him on any day, and that's wrong. That's a distorted perception of your own abilities, and I think that's maybe part of what being a black belt should mean, is that you actually have an honest assessment of where you're at. And I think huge respect to what Sean said. Has he done anything impressive? Almost certainly he has, but he's got a bar that he's setting here because of the people he knows and the things he can do outside of that. That I think that's a very honest perspective. And the lens, that's what it is to me.Maybe that's how I'd answer. Whereas a black belt, someone who has an honest assessment of their own abilities and can perform them at a certain level, something like that.
I like that. That's a really good place to start, Todd. What are you thinking? What makes a black belt?
I think that's an excellent perspective from Mark. To define the parameters that we might be judged at within our community are going to be different than outside people, because on a surface level, there's going to be that expectation of technical proficiency. Those that were into 80s ninja movies think that, we should be able to finish everybody in 30 seconds. I think you've got you've got two different categories, the fighter and the martial artist, and the fighter that's training for that proficiency and to finish people and maybe just is more on the competitive side of things, versus somebody that's living a lifestyle, a black belt lifestyle. And that's taking into consideration, for me, your character, your hygiene. Are you taking care of yourself, taking care of other people? And are you willing to protect those things that are important to you? And do you have the ability to? So Mark mentioned Akayao Sensei, our sensei, that we take a lot of inspiration from, and his comment was that a black belt should have the ability to finish somebody and the discerning capacity to know when that is appropriate. And I think that is critical, because you could simply be a thug that's tough and able to fight and walk into a judo club, a karate club, and run through a bunch of people, but the character is not part of that person's journey. They don't deserve a black belt. And in some cases, people that maybe have attained a black belt under a certain lineage, if they display really poor judgment, and I think about things like the Order of Canada, you can get that taken away. So I would be in favor of, if you are part of an association and you turn out to be a bad person, that you're no longer recognized under that association as a black belt. So I think it is not only how you act in the dojo, it's how you carry yourself in the world outside the dojo, off the mat.
Interesting. I like this, Seb. What are you thinking?
All of those things. Great job, everyone. For me, for the longest time, it was just a piece of cloth, and I truly believe that. For thousands of years, this wasn't even a thing. In the 19th century is when it really became something, and before that, people were engaging in lifelong pursuits of the martial arts, and exceeding levels of that we quote unquote would give a black belt to today in a lot of discipline. And it's also very context relevant. You take a black belt here, you bring him here. What does that make that person now? You take, and again, not to mention Islam, of course, he was joking because he's a bit of a clown, but also he's an absolute savage and he's not wrong. You toss anybody in there, they'll get demoted for the most part. And, and that's just life. But when I see, so if I was to give a succinct answer that kind of encompasses what Mark said and what Todd said to this point, I would say for me, technical know-how meets operational capacity and conduct. The intersection of those three things, for me is essentially what I like to see in a black belt, whatever style they are, whatever, no style. All style can fall, without focusing on a specific style. And then again, we know Mark was talking about context relevant. So if you're a high level competitor, okay, so that's cool. So guys at the highest levels of the IBJJF or ADCC rule set or whatever rule set they're in, so now they're dividing in different rule sets as well. So one guy might be a black belt, a grade black belt, but then you move him to a different rule set and that's not his cup of tea or whatever. I mean, ultimately he has to have those three factors. He has to have that intersection, but there's infighting and things that are created, that are made up, conjured up, that are just humans being humans, which is trying to inflate their own ego and using the props of defeating others in order to achieve that. And that's definitely not a black belt trait as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. You bring up the fact of the belt was just a piece of cloth. And interestingly enough, one of the things I really liked about Wushu was the fact that we didn't have belts. It was just you were either a senior or junior, depending on who was there before you or not. And it didn't really matter what belt you were. It was more about the skill set that you could show. I think that's a great point. Sean, you got any thoughts on this?
Quite a few. And so, Chance, just to kind of continue on with what you just said, perhaps that's the case in Wushu, but that isn't the case in reality. Because when you step into Wushu, first time, 10th time, 100th time, whatever, everyone's categorizing everyone. Everyone's understanding who's the most senior, who's the most junior. Where are you in the pecking order? That's what happens. That's what humans do. We categorize, we judge, we assess, we put you in the pecking order. You're 10 out of 100. Now you're 7 out of 100. That's just what we do. Now, how hard we do that and how frequently we do that, well, that's a whole different story. But when you step into a room with strangers or with friends and there's something about to go down, the pecking order begins. Guaranteed. Now, whether you can accept that or not, whether you know that in your head to be true or not, well, that's on you. But that's what I've seen throughout most of my life. And I think if we're all being honest, we would all nod our heads and say, yeah, there is a pecking order. And it isn't about the belt. The belt can be whatever color. And it goes directly back to what Mark, how this conversation came about when Mark saw the video, sent it to Chance and I in a DM, and we kind of had a few laughs about it. But I think the reason I really like the video is because it created a reaction in Mark, not a negative reaction. He didn't throw himself on the ground and have a tantrum like a child. What he did do was he started this conversation with us, and it was good. It's a healthy conversation to have. And I think I appreciate what Islam did. Whether he was doing it jokingly or not, all of that is immaterial. The video itself is the trigger to begin a conversation like this that is often not had. Everyone knows that there's a pecking order, but no one talks about the pecking order. Everyone knows that there's black belts who aren't super freaking legit black belts compared to Islam, et cetera, et cetera. It is the contextualizing pecking order of humans that we all do. Now, what does that all mean? I suppose to me, I appreciate the fact that someone out there has the juice to be able to poke a few people in the chest via video and say, ha ha, bring it. I love that bring it attitude because it sorts out the pecking order. So I'll sum up there and we'll see where it goes.
I like this. Let's dive into the pecking order then. Todd, you got any thoughts on this?
I was reflecting on a visit from Nathan Menard, who Seb knows, and he was my first jiu-jitsu instructor. And he was kind enough to come to my karate dojo and do a little mini seminar. And he worked in with us a little bit. And he noticed, he looked around because we had some black belts in there, and he went, "Oh, how do you know what everybody's degree is without the stripes? Because we don't have stripes on our belts." And I said, "Well, you should just know, like you'll be able to recognize pretty quick where people land." And, I think that's true. What you say, you can walk into a room, we can walk into just, Saturday nights or Saturday night parties, Sunday night Super Bowl. And as gentlemen practicing martial arts tend to have a pretty good sense in the room who might be a legitimate, dangerous person or not. We sense that, but it's only going to be the people, I think, in most parts that are switched on to that. If you're in that environment, you're quicker to recognize who those people are. Pecking order, we get into rank so often in our different disciplines, and yet you have, a superstar 16-year-old that comes out of nowhere and can really take apart a well-experienced person, and that well-experienced person, through diminishing athleticism, years of injuries, things like that, shouldn't be, I don't think you should be disillusioned about what you bring to the table, because you still have that experience. If we're talking pecking order, that person should still be respected. My sensei now is 84, and at 84 is incredible. And none of us imagine that if, there was some fight between us that he should end up walking away less scathed, and I have to appreciate the same thing with those 18 and 19, 20-year-olds, that's going to be a very difficult day for me in some cases, but I bring something else to the table that is still legitimate. It was a very interesting experience for me, going from somebody that was traveling to help with seminars and taking on a teaching role in karate in several locations in Canada, putting in a tremendous amount of effort, to starting jiu-jitsu. And then all of a sudden I was the nail. And my thinking was that if that experience happened when I was maybe a new black belt or second degree black belt in karate, it would have probably been a lot more difficult to deal with. I surmise that I likely would have been a little bit more self-conscious about it, and probably would have had a few more sleepless nights over that experience, because I'm walking in with guys that, have been training 4 or 5 years when I'm 25 years in, and getting submitted. And the fact that I had a lot of time in as a black belt already, I felt confident in the areas that I was proficient, and it allowed me to go and explore and maybe leave some of that ego behind to go learn a new skill. My thinking really was, wow, this was an eye opener, like we've heard so many people say, and that I really need to learn this. And my first inference was, I just need to figure out how to get up off the ground from these guys so I can get back to where I'm proficient. And very quickly fell in love with everything that jiu-jitsu offers. So a little bit of a tangent there on pecking order, but I think the pecking order changes from beginner to middle to when you see Elio at the Valencia brothers on video saying, at one point I was the best fighter in the world, and that's no longer the case. I'm a great instructor, but those things change, those things diminish. At one point, Anderson was the greatest in the world, and that's no longer the case. So still in the pecking order, he deserves all the love and respect from everything he's done for something that we love. And, he should go down as we revere the great senseis in Japan. Those guys deserve that type of respect as well.
You made me think of Silvio and Silvio Bering and his dad Flavio. We just had him up here recently for a for a seminar, and he's in his 90s, right, Mark? Something like that. He's
87.
87, so he's almost in his 90s, but he's, you know, 9th degree red belt jiu-jitsu. He still trains, he still goes to seminars, he still does all these things. And to say that he would be you know, ineffective in a fight is a far stretch, but also he wouldn't be like, say, Professor Mike or somebody else, or Heron or Henner or somebody like that in a fight, just due to the fact that your body, it takes a toll on your body over time. I think that's a great point. Mark, what were you gonna say?
I think that's exactly that. I think Sean makes an excellent point. Like, I think the thing is about pecking order is it's fluid and should be context based, especially as we're trying to be. I think, without being too high minded about it, we're practicing martial artists in an attempt to sort of elevate ourselves in some way, right? And I think to be able to set aside your ego and allow yourself to be like both Todd and I went from black belt to putting on a white belt. I remember profoundly my first jiu-jitsu class, walking in and having a 15-year-old kid who I outweighed by 80 pounds, and he could hold me down because I was constraining myself to not deploy the other techniques I might know to be able to stop him doing that. But within that rule set, that context, that person knew more than I did, and it was like magic. He could glue me to the ground, and I couldn't do anything. And as I say, it was profoundly affecting. And to be able to not lose your mind and say, okay, I have something I can learn here from that person and from the person that taught that person and so on, let that go, I think I absolutely believe that a pecking order exists. We just have to allow, if you want to have a genuine experience where you're open to learning more and improving yourself, allow yourself to be put further to the end of the line, and that's all right. But also, as we work to be better and better selves, be seeking to move your way up that line through your efforts and your abilities and the acquisition of new knowledge. That's fine as well. Just don't be resentful when it doesn't happen, or it happens slower than you think it should. I think that was probably why I was more willing to accept. I stayed at purple belt longer than you sort of might within the time frame, because I had a good discussion with Professor Ryan, and I was doing some things that I needed to learn to not do. And I think you have to be willing to accept that stuff. Not saying I've been here long enough. I need my brown belt now. That it's not time based. It's experienced and demonstrated capability. And I think once you can sort of accept that and put ego aside, you will have a better experience and you will grow. And if you don't, you are those people who throw on a black belt, because I can buy a black belt on Amazon for what, $9? I mean, I can throw one on, that's no problem. And the first place I go, I'll take that belt off and throw it in the parking lot. And it's not real. And I think once you have a real appreciation, the belt stops mattering. I don't care about the color of my belt. Like, it's what do I know inside, and how much have I learned, how much have I grown, how much have I improved? Those are the things that I'm trying to do for me. And if I can, at this phase of my martial arts journey, take some of those things that I've learned and help a 5-year-old kid not be afraid of being bullied, or learn how to at least make space and call attention to themselves so that something bad doesn't happen to that kid, I feel that's great. I feel that's a thing I can give back. And should I be recognized for that? I think that's the only reason I need to have that belt, is so the parents know that I'm probably qualified to be helping that kid learn that thing. But it doesn't matter to me whether I have that belt on or not.
Yeah,
because I know inside.
Well, and this is an interesting point in the fact that it signifies to others a skill level, but it's not so much the same thing for ourselves, right? I think that's a really interesting point on that. Seb, what are you thinking?
Yeah, you know, it's really interesting. The first thing that came to mind when Sean was talking about pecking orders is tournament. You know, you show up into a tournament, what happens? You know, while you're on the scale, all eyeballs are on you. With somebody else on the scale, and we already start making matchups in our mind, wondering if these guys are in our weight class or if they're not or whatever. And I think in a competitive setting, it really happens even more so because it's inevitable. You guys are going to clash and you don't know anything about each other. So there is a fear and insecurity, and guys can say there isn't, but they're full of it, right? Like they want to know where they stack before the fight happens so they can have the moral courage to engage and walk on the mats. And that's a very difficult thing to do. And that's what makes competing so valuable. But also, I think at some point, when you've been around enough dangerous people, truly dangerous people that are very well-rounded in a variety of different capacity, it's kind of cool to just be like, all my friends are dangerous, like don't worry about their belts, like if somebody's with me, you're likely to not want to start stuff, and there's just something really, really awesome with that, in being surrounded with other warriors, regardless of their style, regardless of their belt level, regardless of any of that. Is this somebody that if the proverbial feces hit the fan, I would be glad to have around me? And that there's something so cathartic about this, and I think that for me, it's really preventing me from trying to sort of evaluate myself in relation to others. All my friends are dangerous. Any given day, one of us can lose. I don't know if that makes any sense, guys.
100%. I'm giggling because I was thinking about it when you first get in the military, especially, and you get surrounded by people. All of a sudden, you go to the range for the first time and you see guys who know how to shoot, and you're like, oh, okay, I'm gonna learn from that guy. Like, I want to see what he can do. And then you get, into the machine gun range, and you see that dude, and you're like, ooh, yes, I want him on the machine gun. And anytime you get into the violent arts, I think people's natural propensities start to show a little bit, which then allows us to go, ooh, wow, oh wow, oh, and you can start like drawing little pieces from them and start wanting to hang out with that crew, or I want to hang out with these guys, or et cetera down the line. And as you advance martial arts, military, police, I imagine it, the more dangerous people you get around, the more dangerous people that you get introduced to. And then that, like, you're like, wait a second, there's even more dangerous people. Oh my goodness. Like, I want to go talk to the next level. And there's this little thing in the back of our heads. I don't know if it's a guy thing, but that wants to climb that little hierarchy little bit by little bit.
I don't think it gets any more primal than that. It just doesn't. It doesn't get more primal than the capacity for violence. I mean, when we look, when you look at history, I mean, we are here because people were stepping up, and people have the capacity for violence, and it's ingrained in us to a certain extent to be capable and to appreciate people that are capable of using that. But more so, as you get wiser and as you develop in that world, you start understanding that I have even more respect for people that have all that capacity, that find alternative ways to deal with things if they can, so that's where that wisdom comes in at some point.
What do you got, Mark?
I remember very well, just because I think it's the phrase that sums that up for me, with my very first private with Master Silvio, where we were talking about what does self-defense mean, and he said, do the minimum you must to preserve your integrity. And I thought, I really like that. For me, it really resonates, just because the thought, and what is my integrity? Like we said, it's protecting those things that are important to me, which is the safety of others. There's a certain morality that goes with all that, but do the minimum you must to preserve your integrity. That should be our mandate, and the ability, how far I can go past that as what the minimum, that what I can do, that's what we need to do. That needs to get as big as we can make it, because in that way I can do the best job of preserving that integrity. But do the minimum you must to preserve your integrity is a phrase that has stuck with me for, by this point, like 12, 13 years. So I really like the way Seb put it.
I like that line. That's a great line. I think you've said it to me many times, and I love it every time you say it to me. Sean, what are you thinking on this?
I'm hearing a few things that kind of crystallize into at least a key word, and that is curiosity. Because to achieve a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu specifically, you've got to have a freaking boatload of curiosity. Like, you're not going to last a year if you're not a curious person. Because on day 1 or day 2, you'll quit because you won't be asking yourself the questions like, how did that 15-year-old pin me to the mat? I need to know. I'm curious. I want to know how this is done. If this, then that. That is the kind of mind of a black belt. As a day 1 white belt, you're already a black belt if you have the curiosity in life. The curiosity. And how much curiosity does it take? It takes a black belt's worth of curiosity to become a black belt. And so for me, it's about curiosity.
Yeah.
All of my martial arts existence has been a pursuit of excellence in curiosity. I need to know, not I want to know. I need to know certain things in life. When I bump up against a hard wall, I need to know how to get over it, around it, or under it, maybe through it. But I'll figure it out. I will figure it out. And I can casually say that. I can boldly say that. I can step up on anyone and say that. I will figure it out because my track record supports that. But that's my curiosity that I've had for a long, long time. And so, Chance, you talked about, you in the military, maybe you bump into someone who's pretty good with a handgun. They're a good shooter. And you identify them. Wow, I'm in basic training. Look at that instructor. He's so rad. I want to be that. How do I get to be that? My curiosity starts firing off. Your curiosity starts firing off. And then somewhere along the way, a year later, 2 years, however many years later, you bump into the man, the dude who can do all of the things. And so you're amazed. You realize that there are levels to the game that you never, ever considered. You identify the man, you start pursuing the man, and then somewhere along the way, you bump into the actual man, and your mind is blown again. And you're like, what is even going on? There's levels to the levels that I didn't know how to spell levels. And so it goes. And that is life. And so at one point, you're in basic training, standing with a 9mm in your hand, wondering how to spell 9mm. And the next thing you know, years later, you're the man. And how did it happen? Well, it wasn't good luck. It wasn't happenstance. It was freaking curiosity. Because if you don't have curiosity, you will never be the man, ever. Doesn't matter who you line up with. You can have all of the savages around you in the world doing a 360 dance around you with you in the center. And you will never be the man. You will never be a savage unless you have the curiosity to understand who the fools are that are dancing around you right now. Who are the actual savages? How did they become it? And how do I become it? And that path is different for everyone. My path is different from Seb's path, different from Mark, Todd, and Chance's. All of our paths are unique to us. But the common ingredients, 100% for sure, is a big frickin' dollop of curiosity.
Todd, I'm going to come back to you. What do you think?
It parallels well, I think, the curiosity I look at as a spark, and to continue to be curious in terms of putting yourself in difficult situations and how are you going to navigate those. I think I would add a commitment to that, because there are several things that I'm curious about trying, different sports, but I'm not committed to going out and spending the time to learn those skills, because I'm already, my book is full with the things that I am committed to. And in my mind, the commitment, and that is what's going to get you through the injuries, what's going to get you through those, nights, dark nights when you've been the nail again. Those who are most committed are the ones that are typically going to win. And that is true of good and bad people, unfortunately. I'd say we're on the good side of things. I asked the class a few weeks back that I was working with. What is more important, the willingness to fight or the ability to fight? And it was interesting. We had a group of newer blue belts, purple belts, and a brown belt, and there was this great debate in part on, well, it should be 50-50, and well, you wouldn't be willing to fight unless you had the ability to fight, et cetera, et cetera. And I said, well, if you found yourself at the top of a ski hill with all the ability in the world to ski down and somehow had this panicked feeling that was taking away that willingness, you're able to do it, but not willing to start the descent, you're still stuck on the top of a mountain. So likewise, when it comes to combat, whether or not that's in a training environment or you are out in the street and defending a loved one or yourself, if you have all this ability and no willingness to engage, then the ability just goes out the window. I'd rather see somebody with the commitment and the willingness to learn, to train, to ultimately get in and fight. That are the type of people that I would like to be surrounded with. That's the guys that Seb is surrounded with, the guys that Mark and Sean, you and Chance are surrounded with. It's a good feeling. It holds me to a higher standard, and so I think curiosity, that goes a long way. I would just say that it's incumbent on us, if we are going to start to make strides and get further down the road and work through the injuries and work through the difficult days, then the commitment needs to be there, the willingness needs to be there in order to develop and discover the ability, the potential that we have.
Yeah, I really like that. I got this image, the movie Gladiator, when they're in the forest and Russell Crowe's character is about to be executed by the Praetorian Guard, and like the blade sticks, and he's like, yep, it happens sometimes, the frost. And it made me think of the line, no inspection ready unit will be useful in combat, and no combat ready unit will ever pass inspection. And this is it's such a beautiful point in the fact that you can learn, to your point, Todd, you can learn all of the skills, but if you don't have the capacity to use them, those skills mean basically nothing. And I think that's an interesting point to go down. Seb, you got any thoughts on this?
Man, I got all kinds of points. I was still reminiscing the old savagery piece, because I was like, you're only really as savage as the savagery you do in the moment, really. I mean, because, maybe last time you lucked out, or maybe last time you showed up for yourself, and maybe you don't today, because you got guys at the highest levels, at the highest of highest levels, and sometimes they get in there and they vapor lock. Like, it happens to everyone. It definitely has the potential, and the potential is diminished greatly as you are, at the highest levels. But when you're at the highest levels, you're also facing people at the highest levels, and that makes a massive difference also. So there's so much context to that, as far as I, and then you start talking about, okay, let's change the parameters ever so slightly. Now we're standing here, or now we're doing this, or now we're dropping an edged weapon in there, or now we're doing, like, you can literally expose anybody. Anybody can be exposed. It just depends on context. And so, what's a reasonable ask for a human being? Like, when you look at your own journey, what is your reasonable ask? And for me, it always goes back to sort of something that I use extensively in a tactical world, which is the priorities of life. Like, if this is for self-defense purposes, what is reasonable in terms of pursuance? Because as Todd alluded to, you may or may not be able to engage in absolutely everything. But what is the context that you're the most likely to be faced with whatever challenge? And what are some of the things that you need to put into place in order to be doing that? And, this is the conversation we have on the jiu-jitsu mats all the time. It's like, I don't care if you're a second-degree black belt in jiu-jitsu, if you've spent your entire career sitting down to roll, your second degree will never be put to the test. It's never going to work, because you're not going to take the fight where it needs to be, so that you may apply the tools that you've so diligently worked at. And so I would prefer you being a mid blue with takedowns then and so now I'm I'm kind of breaking down a bit technical know-how, which is completely irrelevant. It's just for the sake of conversation. But I just find it really interesting, when certain people look at other people and say, well, if you were a savage, you'd be X, Y, and Z. And then another person comes from a different angle and they say, well, if you were a savage, you'd be X, Y, and Z. It's like at the end of the day, it's all ego driven to a certain extent, right? It really is. What isn't, it's the pursuit of that personal excellence for your own sake. But I think it's important to remind ourselves, and this is one of the first things that I try to implement in my own life, is like anytime I achieve something of relevance, regardless of what it is, in martial arts or anything or whatever, I have to take myself down by flanking myself from another angle and be like, what if this was this? And it's not about taking myself down like in a destructive way where I'm trying to deconstruct my accomplishment. It's more about what's next, what now, and what could potentially challenge me from these different angles, And so I think that you can, and it's happened to me sometimes where you're evaluating somebody and the first thing that comes to mind is, well, I'm a jiu-jitsu black belt, like I'm good. It's like, wait a minute. Are you? Yeah, you don't know anything about that person. And you also don't know what they bring to the table and all this stuff. So I think just like anything else in life, we have the propensity to have certain destructive behaviors and it's really easy to disregard them. It's way harder to address them and call ourselves out and say, wait a minute, I don't know anything about this dude. Yeah, you might be the toughest guy you've ever met. That's not to say you don't meet a tougher one today. And or somebody that has more wits than you. So that person may not be physically, mentally, and emotionally tougher than you necessarily, but what if they have a lot of wits? And something, they're crafty and they can do certain things, or what do they have certain attributes on all those realms that really can cause a challenge for you. So if we look at fights and we say not all the best fighters in the world win the fights, the styles and styles make fights, right? So you can take somebody that theoretically has beaten a lineup of guys, and all of a sudden he finds himself with a very, very specific problem, a dilemma that he is incapable of solving on account of some of their own shortcomings that just so happen to be intersecting perfectly with the skill set that the person brings to bear. That person is theoretically not better than that person, but they still got their, handed to them because of the shortcomings that they have and perhaps either refuse to expose or never were exposed. So all that to say that it'll be very interesting to see what Alex Pereira does in his next fight with the Dagestani guy, because everybody comes to, and I'm going on a total tangent here, but everybody comes in saying, they want to build their resume by beating Alex Pereira to his game. Why would you ever do that? That's completely ridiculous. Like, you guys, you don't have to prove to anybody you can stand with that guy, because it may work. It likely won't, So if you want to win and you want to be on top of the game and you want to have him, you want to have him as a win on your resume, why don't you do what it is that needs to be done to achieve that outcome instead of what you think you can, ego driven,
I wonder how much of this is the non-removal of the same mentality, skill set or not. So this is what I'm thinking when you were talking there, was the fact that you said, even at a black belt level, we're still going to start picking apart each other. And, that's what we see with the UFC when it first came out was, well, is this style better than this style? Is this thing better than that thing? When in reality, fighting comes down to a lot more of context than skill set, because at a similar skill set, the context is going to start to play. Like you're saying, a striker meets a grappler, a wrestler versus jiu-jitsu. When those things start to play into it. But I think of the unskilled person in the backyard brawls who are just like, I'm a great fighter. I beat up 4 people and nobody knows how to fight. But that guy thinks he's the greatest thing since sliced bread. Now, he could then join martial arts. He could go through the whole thing. He could destroy people left, right, and center. He could get his black belt. But I don't think that mindset would change unless he gets humbled over and over and over again. And so I'm wondering how much of, that fighter mindset of well, I'm gonna beat this guy at his game to show how tough I am, is the same mentality as the dude in the backyard going, "For I just beat up 4 of my friends. I'm the toughest guy I know." I wonder how much of that is the same. Mark, what do you think?
I like things in groupings of letters because that's the way my simple mind works. But I used to say people's jiu-jitsu game is formed by a triangle, and the shape of that triangle varies, and that was your attributes, your abilities, and your athleticism. And because, for example, this is a lesson that Master Brain gave me where I was talking about, it was Braven at the time, young, super athletic, very quick, and I could not get a hold of this guy, and he would continually do things like pass my guard, and I couldn't slow him down. And I said, well, how do I beat this guy? And Master Brain said, well, don't stop trying to play that game. You can't look at your size, your age, all those things. Your attributes are different. So as Seb was saying, don't try and play that game. You will lose. You don't have that ability. So like change bring it to what you're good at. And so again, with my little trifecta of letters there, I think curiosity absolutely essential. That's how we continue to learn. But if we don't do anything with that, so we have to be committed to that. So I think you then have to have the courage. So I like the 3 C's there to then do something with that, or the courage, capacity. I don't know. I haven't decided which third C I want to use, but I think that's important. But it's that's what separates it, I think, from your point, Chance, around, am I a tough guy, or am I somebody that's trying to understand differently what is Budo versus fighting? Like it's am I here to learn to be the toughest guy, or is being the toughest guy an outcome of something different that I'm trying to do for myself? And that's kind of where I get to. I think it's to just be the toughest guy isn't necessarily what it is we're trying to do. It's about character. It's about integrity and some of that for me. And I'm not in any way dismissing others who are looking for something different. But I think you owe it to yourself to be honest about what it is you're trying to achieve, and be on that path and be committed to that path, and keep looking down that path. And that's that curiosity. How far does this road go? And challenge yourself to keep going down that path. And also understand that when you learn something new, you're like, there's this interesting side street from this road that I should probably have a look down, because maybe there's something that I'm not understanding because I've been very focused on this.
That's a great point. Seb, were you going to say something earlier?
I totally forget what that was, but I got a good example of using something against somebody in a way. And I think I'm telling you guys this for no other reason than it's a funny story. And so this guy that was on the team was a much better shot than I was on 300 blackouts on M16. M4 platform, really, really proficient shooter, like very fast and very accurate. And I'm like, he calls me out on the line in front of the boys, and I'm like, yeah, for sure, we're in. And I'm looking at myself going, okay, this is not going to go over well. So I have to find a way to beat this guy. And I won't name him, but he was just full of it, eh? Like he just loved himself so much on that gun, and he just could ride it like nobody's business. And it made me so happy because he was one of my guys, so I was happy he was in our club. But eventually what happens is he calls me out, and I'm like, kid, you got lots to learn. And so over the course of the next 20 minutes before we hit the line, I just couldn't stop jabbing him. I was like, you think I've showed you everything. You think, and I just get into his head that way. And he starts putting all kinds of pressure on himself. And we had to intersect, the shot timer and the accuracy. It had to be sort of, it was less important to have 100% of one and be more balanced. And anyway, long story short, he caught me talking to other guys about, the competition that was coming in 20 minutes and how this was going to turn out. And all of this is a big plan, because I know I'm not winning, but I just want him to get into his head. And sure enough, he gets on the gun and pew, pew, 2 flyers, right? Because he's trying to go too fast. So I just stood there and essentially did what I did in a reasonable time and intersected the 2 and, won this. But there is not a single chance if I just said, let's go side by side, and that I was going to beat him to the draw or to the punch. And so this goes to show that it's much more about everything else and everything into context, but also what are the win conditions? And I think sometimes we forget that. Like, what are the win conditions here? What have I actually won? I didn't win a shooting competition. I outsmarted him. That's different. And so I think that a lot of the times we take martial arts at face value, but there is so much more to the picture, just as there is with almost anything else that humans are engaged in. We have a savage tendency. One thing we're very savage at is to oversimplify everything, to make sense, for our brains to be able to make sense and process life. But the reality is everything is a lot more complex. And so at the end of the day, it comes down to that self-regulation piece when it comes to humility and curiosity. And humility and curiosity should go hand in hand. If you're very curious, you're inherently going to know how to be a little bit more humble. If you're not curious, that's when you're allowing yourself to create or to construct this persona of yourself in relation to what it is that you're getting the good hormones flowing on, but necessarily isn't necessarily accurate. And so I just I don't know, man. There's a lot that goes into these, especially if we speak to weaponization of violence or any of those things. There is so much that goes into this. Ultimately, having an acceptable level of capacity in all different areas, I think, is probably your best bet if you are to walk around everywhere, and less necessarily specialization and really high level in one thing, unless you have the opportunity to be high level in numerous things, of course, would be completely different. But I think we'd all take that if we could, but it's pretty tough to achieve.
Basically it's a lifetime, right? If you want to be a high level in a lot of things, you're going to be spending your entire life doing that. I mean, you could spend your entire life being excellent at one thing. And again, it brings me back to Flavio Bearing. I mean, he's been doing jiu-jitsu for 70 years. Like, he is what many would call an expert, but still curious, still looking to learn. Todd, you got any thoughts on any of this?
Yeah, my thinking is that as I was looking back at, okay, what is a black belt? The experience of that journey, the pursuit of being a black belt, ultimately should enrich our lives. If it was simply a means of dealing with physical violence, there to me, there isn't enough meat on that bone, right? It's been several years since I've been in a fight on the street, and whether the next one comes tomorrow or when I'm 75, it's not a frequent enough occurrence to where I would say, well, I'm training for this, I'm training for this, I'm training for this. The overreaching idea is the pursuit lends something to my life, my family's life, enriches me through the relationships that I have. Mark mentioned Budo, and the components of research, understanding history, appreciating things. I know Seb pays tribute annually to Bruce Lee's grave. That is incredible that we can tie our experience in practicing violence together with a larger overreaching concept of character development, right? And for example, I've made choices in the lineage of Gracie Jiu-Jitsu that I chose to pursue based on the fact that not only do I want what I think is the best choice for me, but what is the best choice for my son, who's going to be 13 next month. And he hasn't caught the bug just yet. He trains, but if it was training or swimming lessons, it's, he's happy to go to swimming lessons, not me. And I look at how is the journey that I've experienced and the things that the things in the world that have opened up to me through this path, how are they going to enrich his life, and those sorts of things. So the black belt does become, although it is just a piece of cloth to cover your butt, you'd need to be able to fight, but there's this larger purpose involved in being a black belt.
So then let me ask you guys this, because I think this is an important question. We see this a lot in Taekwondo, karate, some of the other martial arts, that you could be 16 and have a black belt. And like I want to peel my skin off when I hear about it, because there's the skill set, yes, perhaps, but the experience isn't there. And I think that that's kind of a requirement in my mind when it comes to black belts, is that there has to be life experience behind it. There can't just be a skill set, otherwise you're a tough guy. And I think that's part of it. So Todd, I'm going to come right back to you on this. What do you think about
Please.
the kids?
Yeah, I'm on board. I think it comes back to that earlier comment that you have to have the ability to finish someone and the discerning capacity to know when that is appropriate. And it would be a stretch to say that 16-year-olds have that discerning capacity. And for some people, they don't have it at 18. They don't have it at 22. Some people shouldn't be saddled with that responsibility, as a full-on adult. I also believe that it sets up those kids, and we see extreme cases. You can imagine my face when I'm sitting there and, somebody says to me, "Oh, my 13-year-old is a second-degree black belt," and something do. It's, I feel like that's setting those people up for failure, because at some point they're going to potentially leave that small pond that they're in and be exposed to the wider world in martial arts. And it can be crushing. And I had a discussion with a parent many years ago whose son was on that path, and he was a black belt from whatever preteen, and ended up getting jumped, and it was significant, and he was attacked with a pipe, and he took a lot of damage, and it really shook his identity. He thought that he was this killer, and the environment that he was in promoted that in him, and he was crushed. And so when I'm talking to the mom about this, I said, it's very important that you keep an eye on him, to the point, I said, I don't want to be dramatic about this, but don't leave him at home alone for some time. I said, I think it's appropriate to get him speaking with a sports psychologist, a psychologist, people that are going to be a little bit more well-versed in dealing with this, because this poor guy had been set up to think he was something, got his world shattered. And it took many years for him, I think, to come back. And he's lost that martial arts pursuit. He doesn't have it in his life anymore to enrich it, because I think a lot of what he was wearing, if you will, as an identity, was perpetrated on a fraud, and not his fault. He was just put in the wrong environment, paid the monthly fees, and not set up for success. He was set up for failure. So I would look, and we look at cases now where, look at Nicky Rod as a brown belt, killing everybody in competition and not being promoted. We could probably use a little bit more of that, but it is not the thing that sells monthly memberships, when you're going down to the strip mall. And unfortunately, parents don't have the ability to judge whether or not a place is legitimate or not, unless they've had that experience. And I've said several times that, if I put my kid in swimming lessons for 3 years and he kept sinking, I might think it's time to look for a different instructor, maybe a different pool. But parents can put their kids into these black belt programs at 10, 11, 12, 13 years old and pay. And they don't have the reference point to know whether or not this is money and time well invested or a fraud. So yes, I totally agree. 16, no good.
Yeah. It's such a, it's a bit of a divisive moment, because I do know lots of people that are 100% with us on this, and like, absolutely, kids should not have black belts. You should be at least 18 and onwards, that kind of thing. But I've also met some really proficient kids who are highly skilled, who are young, but have a level of discernment with it, just based on the environment that you're in. To your point, Todd, that the instructors and the people that are with them, it plays into it a lot. Sean, You got any thoughts on any of this?
I do, and I'm afraid I'm going to have to create turbulence by disagreeing.
You? Turbulence? What?
No, okay, so I'm going to couch my statement initially by stating this, that what I'm about to say is not my full belief, but I'm going to stir it up, so you're just going to have to take it with a grain of salt. So, I think that most black belts aren't actually black belts, because how we're evaluating black belts right now is through the lens of how much ass can you kick, bro? Nicky Rod, he's kicking everyone's ass. He's the mega black belt, but he's only a brown belt, but he's a mega black belt. Fighting is not a black belt. And I'm pausing for effect. Winning competitions isn't a black belt. Pausing for effect. So what is a black belt? Is it how much ass you can kick? Is it how much ass you've kicked? Is it how much, what is it? I think it's none of those things. We've taken the black belt conversation through a journey over the last hour, and on the journey that is probably correct for this group, because we're all experienced martial artists. We all understand BJJ and the love for it. We all understand that it's a long journey, typically about 10 years to get your black belt, which is long enough for you to understand whether you had enough curiosity to accomplish that 10-year journey and learn a thing or two. So the journey, the 10 years, is not about how much ass you kick. It's about how much you learn. So going back to your point initially, Chance, where you saw a guy on the range and he's like the mega shooter or whatever. Well, he ain't the mega shooter because you're still in basic training and you don't have enough exposure, enough curiosity to understand what a black belt actually looks like. Much like I think a lot of black belts don't know what an actual black belt is. If all we're viewing them through is the lens of ass kickery, we all know that it's way more than just kicking that ass. It's a much richer journey than that. You need to be a more complete human than that. Mark has referred to it in this conversation. It's a more holistic person. It's not just how much one punch man you can punch your way through life. So black belt is things that we won't have chance to talk about today because we won't have the time. So let me twist it up and say this, that you can be a black belt in a lot of things that don't have black belts to be presented. As an example, I've been racing mountain bike a long time, and I would consider myself to be a black belt in mountain bike racing. But there's no black belt. No one gets a black belt in that sport. How you would get a black belt in that sport is if you raced a boatload and understood through many years what that sport is all about. But if you understand the sport as a whole after many years of experience and curiosity, if you understood it almost completely, you still don't get a black belt. No one will present you a black belt. What you do have, in my opinion, now to my point, is an internal black belt. You understand that you don't need the strip of material around your waist. Your life is a representation of the belt that you wear. And so it ain't about how much ass you'll kick later today on the mat, in the martial art, in the sport. It's about life. It ain't about the karate punch. And so, what are we talking about when we're talking black belts? I don't think we need to focus overly on Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu as the example. I think what we need to do is expand the footprint of the conversation to what does it mean to be a black belt in life? How about that?
It's good.
Interesting, Mark. What do you got?
No, it's good. I think that's sort of what like Todd kicked it off talking about character, right? I think you're absolutely right. It's moving through your life in a different way because of that. And I think as we mature as martial artists, and especially if you've studied more than one, I think that can be a real aid to that maturity, because if your frame of reference changes and you become less focused on the color of the belt and more about the journey, as you put it, which I think is totally correct. And I think it is those moments where, like, as Chance said, I think you've got 16-year-olds who are incredibly proficient martial artists, but that danger of giving them that black belt if they don't yet have that maturity to understand that, like we talk about a junior black belt, that kid doesn't see it as a junior black belt. That kid sees it as a black belt. He doesn't get that he's potentially going to get jumped by a bunch of people with a pipe, and all of a sudden his whole world collapses because he isn't this killer that he thought he was. Within a certain context, he is, absolutely. Could he kick all the asses in the dojo of the people up to 16 years old? Probably. But that it's not about that. And we tend to make it kind of age-based, but it's not that. It's just, it's the only measuring stick we have that in a way that we can talk about that. Has that person got that maturity to understand what it is about that black belt? And like you said, it's an internal black belt, right? Once you kind of get it. But how do we monitor someone to say, that guy gets it? Like, I absolutely. I mean, Sean, you're well respected in the mountain bike community. Everybody, within your peer community, everybody would understand you as a black belt. They would come to you for instruction. All those things, right? They have and they do. So Todd, I mean, completely outside of the martial arts, super respected in your professional field, right? Again, people would come to you and ask you, how do I do this better, right? Again, right? That's that black belt concept of life outside martial arts. Martial arts is kind of a microcosm, and maybe by pursuing martial arts, it helps us develop the skill sets and the understanding to do it in different ways in different fields of endeavor. But for me, starting at that young age, martial arts has always kind of been part of my life, and it has helped me think about things in a certain way that I have found really helpful. And I love the ability to maybe pass some of that on to people. But like, what is a black belt? It is a huge question, right? And it isn't about the kicking. How much ass can you kick? Because like Seb said, right? Like, any day I could get tapped by a two-stripe white belt. If he gets it right, it's going to get me, right? It's less likely for sure, but it could happen. So it's not necessarily about percentage of takedowns. It's a bit about that, but not entirely.
It's a piece of it, but not quite all of it. Have you got any thoughts on this?
Yeah, so many things, man, swirling. The first thing that came to mind when you were talking about your 16-year-old black belt and how you had a reaction to it, I'm like, why? Why do you have such a reaction to it? Who cares? Because ultimately, is this about us? Or is this about them? Or is this because you're concerned as a parent? Or which angle are you taking to be upset about that? And I don't mean you're upset as in upset, but it creates a reaction in you. And my question is why does it create a reaction in you? Is this putting a mirror to the fact that you don't have a black belt, or that it's going to take you so long to get one? Or does it become a comparative analysis? Like, what is it? Because it's strange, right? Like, we humans are very complex, and we like to think we're simple, but we have some weird reactions sometimes to things, and it differs if you're put in a certain role where you have a responsibility to be that person, and you have some ownership over an outcome. For example, if you're a parent and your kid is in a certain sport and given a black belt at 10, you have a responsibility to make sure that kid is actually safe out there, that you provided something that's realistic. And so, but to Sean's point, which I really like, because I 100% agree with this, black belt in life and belts in life, and everything is very metaphorical and applicable. For example, so if I look at the kids, okay, so we're going to carry on with the kid example, and we're going to carry on the martial arts example, but it's metaphorically applicable across the board. What if I failed that as a parent? If I don't have the technical know-how of jiu-jitsu, for example, and I can't evaluate per se, or any other martial arts for that matter. I can't evaluate per se what my kid's being taught, but what do I have belts on? Respectful conduct, humility, perhaps, or perhaps understanding that anybody who gets ambushed, I don't care what kind of black belt you have, if anybody ambushes you with a pipe on the side of the head, my friend, when you're coming out of CIBC with your, looking down at your phone, I don't care how tough you are. Is that simple, right? And we know that. And we know that why? Because we've seen some of the best trained warriors in the world get ambushed and not survive, right? And so, yes, there are countermeasures to ambushes, and we all know all these things from a tactical standpoint, but the reality is there is always a way to be completely exposed in any way, that any shape or form that whatever you're doing are not capable of doing in a real context. And so if we have to remove our self-confidence and remove all of the things that we've invested in on account of I wasn't able to survive something that the percentage of survivability was extremely low to begin with, now what? And so the point I'm making is, as a parent, when I'm watching my kid, so I don't understand anything about jiu-jitsu, I'm going to take this out of the equation. But what am I seeing? What am I seeing? What is my kid turning into? What is he sort of exuding now? Is there like a certain overconfidence? Is there a certain, and are we feeding into it? Because if I'm a white belt at holding back my pride from my kid, every time he goes around and I jump on the bandwagon to say how great he is and what he's done in his last competition and everything, I'm feeding into the problem. So see where this is kind of dangerous. It's like we have to have the ability to elevate in all of those different various modalities, including in parenting, for example. And so if I'm reassessing myself in relation to my kid, and my kid is the exemplification of my parenting style and the tools that I've given them, and I watch them, and I failed to recognize that we as a collective are building something that has the potential to be dangerous for that person and others, when do I put a stripe on my belt and become the parent that has that conversation? Because now our problem is migrated into another realm. And so my excuse is going to be, well, I don't know anything about jiu-jitsu. Yeah, well, that has nothing to do with jiu-jitsu. That has everything to do with life.
That is a great point. And to your question, the thing that bugs me about it is consequences. And that's the thing that I think bugs me when I see kids that are black belts, is they don't understand the consequences of their capabilities. So to your point and Todd's point, like if you get jumped, you're going to get jumped. You can't. I remember being taught, the best way to get out of an ambush is to fight through it, right? Head on. But how likely are you to survive that? It's pretty small, but that's your best opportunity to get out. If you don't do anything, you're obviously going to die. But on the opposite side of the spectrum of getting jumped, you could have a 16-year-old that gets into a fight, knocks somebody over, bang, they hit their head on the sidewalk. Now he's dead. Now you have a child who just killed somebody that doesn't understand the consequences of their own actions. And that's the part that it bugs me, because you're handing someone a skill set without an understanding of the consequences.
Yeah, but that's white belt parenting, watching a black belt kid go out into the world. White belt parenting, and by that I mean not having the engagement in the moment, the curiosity as to who is leading your child in that session. Let's make no bones about it for the audience that's listening to this right now. If you are paying monthly fees to a club that is being run by a black belt in whatever martial art you choose, if you drop your kid off and then drive away and don't even look in the rearview mirror to see if the instructor stays around for the rest of the session, like if you just cross your fingers, look down at your white belt that you're wearing as the parent, and hope that for the next few years everything is going to be okay, that's white belt parenting. And so I'm not going to go to the other end of the extreme and say that every time you drop your kid or kids off at the session, you've got to stand there at attention the entire session and pay maximum attention to everything like their life depends on it. I'm not saying that either. Everyone's got to find their balance. But the balance isn't drop your kid off and hope that it all works out over the next few years. That is white belt parenting. And so why does that happen? I mean, I've seen it many times. And it's not just in martial arts. I've seen it in many sports, many activities, many things.
Sure.
Why does that happen? Why do these things go off the rails? And for me, it comes down to lazy parenting, white belt parenting. If you don't have the curiosity to see if your kids are curious, that's on you, not on the kid. That kid who got jumped, I don't know the details, and we don't really have to get into the details, but when I was listening to the story, I thought, man, did he get jumped or did he create the situation? Because maybe he thought that he was the dude. And so it could have been many things. I'm not here to armchair quarterback it. What I am here to say is that happened for a reason. It isn't like a random moment in the universe, a little blip that is just so random that it doesn't make sense. It makes sense to me that incident occurred and had been occurring for years. It's just that this was the final result of something that had been going on for some time. Now, does it sound like I'm laying blame directly at the parents' feet? Maybe I am, but I'm laying the blame at every parent's feet who drops their kid off and hopes that it's all going to work out.
Seb, what do you got?
No, I was just gonna say quickly, yeah, and then you can extrapolate on this and go to the other side. You're laying blame at the parents of the other kids, the kids that are conducting these types of events. Like, when do you find yourself? And don't get me wrong, like you can have very, very good parenting and a bunch. There are other factors that influence how kids grow up. They can, and sometimes very good parents have very bad kids. There's no question that happens, and it can. But generally speaking, if we're to look at a baseline, not the outliers, because outliers are everywhere, but baseline, how does a kid end up with a pipe in his hand hitting somebody over the head? So again, it's not about laying blame. It's about questioning how we do business to see if there's any way that we can do that better, or if there's any way that it could have been done better, or if there's any way that somebody in the future can learn from that event and do it better. If there's a level of engagement or disengagement that isn't occurring, and again, it's just, to Sean's point, but those are questions that I'm not throwing out there to other parents. Those are questions I'm throwing myself under the bus here and asking myself these questions, because it's easy. And if we're busy, and if we have busy lives, and if we have a hectic schedule, and if it just turns out that class, we ought to be spot checking. Like, we ought to be spot checking. We ought to be paying attention to the outcome, which is the behaviors that are exhibited by the people that we, are trying to help our kids, essentially, and failing to really do that objectively, not subjectively. This is my kid and he's the best dude ever. He'll never do anything. You may miss some very critical telltale signs of what's actually developing here.
I gotta go there just because I love the drop your kid off and hope. I hate that. That's awful when that happens. But by the same token, as somebody who's trying to run a class and having parents try and tell their kid what to do from the side, please don't do that. But really, please don't do that. I got this. Don't worry about it. But I think there's that. Like, I work in a technical field. I'm used to, audits are something we do all the time. Like, I'm coming in, so that spot check thing, I think that's useful. But I think there's that, take the time, engage with your kid, and you'll get a sense of what they're learning and how they're feeling about themselves. And there's that false confidence or genuine. I think it's part of just like having genuine, real conversations. And absolutely hang around for the first 10 minutes of class, watch it, get a sense, because I think there's it doesn't take long to get a vibe of is this place helping my kid, or is it giving him her a false sense of themselves? Is it putting them in danger? Is it not giving them skills, but creating the impression that they've got skills? All these kinds of things. But you try and be active and engaged and understand what's going on, and apply some critical thinking. That's what we're looking for. But please stop coaching your kid from the side. I don't need your help.
Trust but confirm.
I used to. I did. I'm going to call myself out. I was that parent. And
you kind of get a pass though, because you know what you're doing.
But I just thought I knew some things that I didn't know. Like, I just didn't know what I was talking about, honestly. And I had my oldest son was on the BJJ mats with me. I mean, we kind of grew up together on the BJJ mats through his teenage years, and he was on the mats with me 7-8 years. And so, that's a great way to raise a kid. Both of my boys are on the mats. It's a great way to raise kids. And if you can't, as a parent, get on the mat with your kids because of some pre-existing medical condition or whatever the case is, I don't know what it would be that anyone could write down on a blank sheet of paper that I would accept as a legitimate excuse to not get on the mat with your kids. It's a pretty short list. And I don't think anyone's got any good reason to not get on the mat with their kids. And so I'd encourage every parent to, whether it's day 1 or day 10 or day 100, doesn't much matter, freaking shake the dust off you, go get on the mat with your kids and start understanding what it is to be a kid, what it is to be a parent, what it is to be a kid and a parent, and really just do it for a while. Like I said, I did it for a few years. I learned a lot about myself, learned a lot about my sons, and I learned a lot about, as Mark said, when to shut up on the sidelines. Because I'd been coaching a long time, and I just thought that I could also be a mega BJJ coach as well, as a freaking 1-stripe white belt. And I sucked from the sidelines. I was an idiot because I didn't know what I was talking about. And so I think I would rather see a parent show up, have their kids on the mats, and chirpy McChirp from the sidelines for the first 10 minutes.
Sure.
So I can shut them down. And yeah, that's great advice, pal. But just, let's talk about it after the class. I'd love to have them involved in that way rather than dropping the kid off in the parking lot. And so try to engage with your children in any way that you can, whether that's on a horse, throwing a frisbee, or on the mats. It just doesn't much matter. The black belt in life, if you've done a few things in your life, if you have a few black belts in life, certainly one of the areas that you're supposed to deliver some black belt goodness is with your freaking kids. So get involved in their life by maybe pursuing a black belt with them on the mats.
That's a great point. Todd, you got any thoughts on this?
I do. I watch my son in class as well. I take the stance that that's his time in there to display and perform what he's going to do. And then we have a discussion about that at the drive home, which, as a father that would like to see some diligence in class, sometimes those are harder conversations. And it is, but I do agree, and I don't say anything in class. I'm fortunate. I actually take my son to my best friend's school. Mark knows as well, who runs one of the most successful competitive schools in Canada. And but as I say, Evan is not switched on at the moment. And so I'm looking at it as how am I as a parent going to support him and just let him have fun? As I was thinking about this concept a little bit earlier as well, like before 16, it's a bit early to be having these life or death conversations and scenarios with kids. Like get in there, have fun. When parents ask me what should I look for in a school, I go, well, first of all, is the kid having fun or not? I think that's number one, because whether I'm doing drills or fight sim, or it's we're level 3 rolling. Like, it's got to be fun. Not every moment of it, but if I'm not having fun, I'm not going back. So why would we expect our kids to go back? So I think fun is number one. And to your point, looking at that qualification and the signs outside of the transfer of technical ability, how do they interact with the kid? Would I like to be spoken to as that way? Are the kids being belittled? Are the kids being indoctrinated to think that sensei knows all, and he's got, as you say, black belts in life across the board, whether you want to talk to him about karate, judo, real estate, shooting guns, law enforcement, politics? That's a big order for sensei to fill. So I think I would say the parents that are uninformed about martial arts and bringing their kids there, even if they're not doing that parenting the way we feel would be ideal, I do credit them that they are trying to fill a gap, perhaps in their parenting. You might have a mom at home with 2 boys, and there's a certain energy in the house. And if she recognizes, I need to get these kids out and train with Mark, train with Seb, train with you, Sean, Chance, so that they have a certain energy and dynamic that they're not getting at home, that's a valiant effort on the mom. Whether she's doing that as best as she could, there might be some blind spots there about whether, stay in. You know what? Get a extra soft area rug for the living room and just get down on the floor and roughhouse with the kids a little bit. So the parents don't have a roadmap to how to be parents of martial arts students any more than we've got the roadmap to just be parents, period. And so I would like to, I'll defer to hoping and giving the benefit of the doubt that some parents are that's what they think is best. I'm not able to communicate these type of attributes. And the brochure said discipline, commitment, courage. That's where I need to go. Okay, well, let's just hope that they get it right and they walk into a dojo or an academy that does provide those things and that mentorship by good people.
By good people. That's super important.
By good people, yeah. And one of the things that I wanted to hammer on here was the fact that trust but confirm, right? Like you can say, this is what the brochure says, this is what it looks like on the sign, this is what I see in a single class when we do the visit or the trial or anything like that. But you still got to check every once in a while. And to this point, like Sean mentioned earlier, we want to expand the conversation a little bit outside the martial arts. My sons both do trumpet as well as jiu-jitsu, as well as other sports and swimming and all these other things. But I don't know how to play trumpet. I have like zero knowledge about music in general. But when we started, I had to take classes too, so that I could check him on certain things as he grew beyond my skill set. Now, am I going to tell him that, the way he's reading his notes is wrong, or the way he's doing this or that or the other thing is wrong? No. But I will say, hey man, you're not holding your trumpet high enough. Your posture's off. Your fingering is wrong. Like, I know the basics, the fundamentals of being able to play, and I can watch those things on him as he grows and plays. And those things will never go away until he gets to a point that he can maintain them without thinking. And I think that is, in my mind, that's the black belt mentality, is to be able to do the basics so well that you don't have to think about them. They happen regardless. What do you guys think? Sean, I'm going to come right back to you.
It made me think of my actual childhood. And so I started playing piano at the age of about 8 or whatever. And I played it for about 10 years. And I also played a whole bunch of other instruments, except the 2 cool instruments, which was drum and guitars. So I kind of came up playing the trumpet and the saxophone and the flute and the clarinet and all the good stuff that was kind of lame at the time compared to if you played guitar or drums. So as I was playing the piano at home, and I was also playing a lot of soccer. I had to make a decision between, am I going to play piano or am I going to play soccer? And that decision was made for me by my dad. And so he was hassling me hard. Did you do your practice? Did you do your practice? Did you do your practice today? And so every day it was the same. And so I started getting irritated at about 16 because my dad was always giving me hassle. And it was, make sure you get your practice in before soccer. And so eventually I decided I loved soccer more than I loved playing the piano. And then we had to have a fallout. Then we had to go head to head. His parenting versus my wants. And my wants were, I want to play soccer. I don't want to play piano. And then he hit me with the ultimatum. It's the piano or it's soccer. And what did I say? Because I'm freaking stubborn. It was easy. I said, well, that's it. That's the last day I'll play piano. That was the last day I played piano. I went to play soccer and I never looked back. Life is choices, man. And, you know, if you step onto the mats as a day oneer in any martial art, you got to know why you're there. And you got to think about where it'll take you and for how long. That's what I did when I was 16 in that moment with piano and soccer. And did I make the right choice or the wrong choice? It doesn't matter. I made a choice, but I was painted into a corner for that choice. And so I think as parents, you know, listening to Todd with his son, you know, there's probably going to become a moment where, you know, it's swimming or it's BJJ. And like, don't do it like my dad did it. Or I hope your son doesn't do it like I did it, as an example, because like I stubbornly and almost like to kind of put it up in his grill said, all right, that's the end of piano. Because maybe it was a bit spiteful. I don't know. I was 16. What do you know? I'm 61. I still don't know much. But like the decisions that we make in the moment, hopefully are thought through a little bit better than that. You said what? I'm going to do it completely different than what you just said. That's sometimes what we do as humans. And as a black belt parent, and I'm, you know, I don't want to throw my dad under the bus too much, but he wasn't a black belt parent. A black belt parent would have figured that moment out better, different, more successful, would have allowed me to retain more skills rather than like stabbing piano in the throat and killing it on the spot. Like, we're all supposed to figure out how to manage that moment as a parent. And so I look back at that as a lesson of to how not to do it, how not to parent in that moment. And I think that is context. That is the pecking order. That is your belt worth anything or not? Are you actually a black belt or are you just wearing a black belt? We all cherry pick, we all judge, we all pecking order in every aspect of our life. And if we're responsible for someone as either a parent or as a black belt coach or in some capacity where we're being held to that higher standard of what's the right thing to do in this moment, I think that's really what we're talking about when we're thinking about black belts. A black belt in life is supposed to be able to manage moments well rather than poorly. And so it's a random thought, I know, but it makes a point. Let's see what you guys think.
I super like what's a black belt. A black belt is about being skilled and discerning in all the things that we talked about to manage that moment, that particular moment, whatever it is, right? Like whether it's a confrontation, right? We talk in self. Can I de-escalate a situation? What am I doing? I'm managing that moment. This interact, whatever. Like the choice between soccer, piano, that moment. That's what it is about how quickly and effectively can I deploy the requisite skills to manage this particular moment. And we're not always going to get it right and all that stuff, but I think I like that. Can I manage this moment? Because what is life but a collection of moments, interactions, and all that stuff? That's cool. I like that. Thank you, Sean.
Yeah. Seb, what do you got?
Well, in line with that is, how curious do I need to be to know what I need to be doing? Because I think that we're oftentimes we're sitting back on account of we don't know something. It's like, well, we're in the age of information. There is nothing that can't be learned, at least at a higher level of depth. And I think that in itself displays a black belt mindset. If you are willing, as a parent or as a person that's struggling with making a decision, to research and do work in relation to those decisions, so that you learn to articulate your ideas better, or learn the most effective way of putting a choice to your kids on account of, say, financial hardship. Like, you can only continue one of those two. So here's are some of the pros and cons of those two, and whatever it is that you decide that you want to do, as I just want you to have the information. And I mean, I think that we tend to go the lazy route, and no offense to Sean's dad, but taking the autocratic kind of approach to this, and really killing the spirit potentially of a kid in relation to a certain thing. And perhaps preventing him from re-engaging in that at a later date. But there are so many benefits, as we know, to piano on brain developments and all kinds of other things. And will a kid necessarily care? It really doesn't matter. They were given the information because you've done the research, and you are trying to give them an informed, have them help them craft or make an informed decision to the best of your ability, notwithstanding or whether or not they're going to take what you're telling them for cash, or just disregard it altogether because their heart is in soccer, for example. And if that's the case, then so be it. You were never going to win that fight anyway, if that's the case, But I do really, really like that. I like that it questions everything on how we do things, and what surface level thinking we apply consistently across the board. And we've had these conversations 475 times on this podcast, how to get a little bit below surface.
We do aim for depth a little bit here, for sure. Todd, you got any thoughts on this?
I was smiling when Sean said about picking martial arts versus swimming, because those are the two non-negotiables in our house. My son has to learn to swim and has to learn to protect himself, because both of those are safety issues. Everything else, you can play ping pong, basket weave, doesn't matter. Find something you love. And I actually I would say to people, don't come to my house and talk about hockey or your kids playing hockey, because heaven forbid my son wants to. And I built him a dojo, not a hockey rink, at our house. But I took him skiing yesterday. It was a school field trip, first of a series of lessons, and I was a volunteer parent. And this kid came off the mountain completely lit up. Like, I don't think I've seen him before for sports, telling me about how well he did, how much he enjoyed it, how much his friends said he did a great job. And his next question was, so how expensive is skiing? Can I take that up and make that a thing? So I managed to duck hockey all this time, but now it looks like I might have a little skiing prodigy on my hands. So I'll support that the best as I can. As I said to the ski instructors yesterday, I choose to destroy my knees in different ways. So it probably won't be me taking the lead on ski instruction. I will have to defer to some people better equipped to teach my son. And that's it. In listening to you guys talk about these are the things that were coming to my mind on parenting and having kids choose. And I feel fortunate that, we're in a position, not only is it not a cheap sport, but we just happen to have mountains within 30 or 40 minutes. So all those things are good. And I'll support that in him. And as I say, defer to the black belt instructors. But if he keeps falling down a year from now, we'll be switching instructors.
There you go.
Good way to look at it. I was just thinking that, my boys actually are loving skiing as well as swimming and a bunch of other stuff. My boys just like to move. That's the big one for me. So it's like, if I can keep them moving, I am happy. They're happy. I'm happy. And interestingly enough, my oldest has found a love of competition in BJJ. He just classes, he's like, sure, whatever, I'm happy, but he really wants to do competitions, to the point that it's now affecting how he does his schoolwork, right? Because I say, okay, well, if you want to be in this next competition, I don't want to have any issues with your homework anymore. And he goes, done, no problem. I got you. And he's on the ball. So these little points, the thing I wrote down here that I want to touch on, I want to get your guys' thoughts on this is, can I do it better? And I think in my mind, that's what really differentiates black belts from any of the other ranks in anything, martial arts or life, skill sets, whatever it is can I do it better? And that question that you ask yourself, the curiosity that Sean was talking about earlier, is what makes a black belt a black belt. Because there are people that attain a black belt and go, okay, cool, I'm done, right? They can toss their hat off to the side and like, check in the box, I never have to work again on this particular skill set. But really, what makes a black belt for me is somebody that will get there and go, okay, how can I do that better? So when it comes to parenting, if you have a really bad situation like Sean, your dad and you, coming out of that, there could have been that question. Dang, could I have done that better? Or he could have been like, check in the box, good to go. Mark, what do you got?
I like that. And I think there's this is the fine line between confidence and arrogance. I think a black belt should have a certain level of confidence, right? You should be aware of the proficiency you've attained, but could that go better? I had a guy that, one of the guys that worked for me a couple of years ago, and he ended every day at work with, what went well, what could have gone better, and what did I learn about he would evaluate his workday every day that way. And in one of our check-ins, and he showed me his book, and he had these, and they're just like little bullet notes. But I thought, wow, what a really interesting, because you could flip back through months. You've got this kind of arc. There's themes in there. There's things that because that's that always asking reflectively, what could I do better? Eventually, you're going to see, oh, you know what? Consistently, it was these things. I can improve that. I'm going to learn that better. I'm going to that interaction with this person or whatever. I think that ability to look objectively at how you could do better. That's definitely a skill set a black belt should have, right? Because it's not like there's only one way. Especially, I mean, we're picking on jiu-jitsu. I've done a lot of martial arts, but the jiu-jitsu, for example, certain things will work for somebody that might not for others, just because of limb proportions. There's certain things I couldn't do on chance because his legs are this long. Like, what am I like? That's not gonna. It just doesn't. But that one size fits all isn't always going to work. There's certain fundamentals that are always going to be true, but then to learn to like, how could that be better for that person? What can I do? Or how could I do this? But all those things, like, yeah, I agree. That's super important. How could this be better? How could I do that better? Is a black belt skill for sure.
I like it. Todd, you got thoughts?
Sorry,
Oh, I got Sean.
I got to jump in because we literally talked about this yesterday. And when I say we, I mean like Lieutenant Colonel Oak McCullough mentioned precisely what you just said now, Mark, in respect to that individual who, at the end of the day, would reflect with those three questions. Oak said that almost word for word. Is that not correct, Chance?
Correct,
and so, yeah, when he was saying it, and it's not like he needed to say that to get my mental nod, like, that's a good dude. Because I'd already done that a long time ago with Oak. He's a repeat guest on the podcast, and he's accomplished. And he teaches leadership sessions down in the United States, and he does all kinds of things, and he's a great dude. Why I respect him is not because he is a retired lieutenant colonel. I respect him because he thinks like he thinks, because that's what he does every night. And so I'll respect an individual who reflects at the end of the night to be a better person the next day more than I'll respect a black belt who doesn't think like that. And so how you think, how you live, how you lead your life, how you lead others, well, I'll respect it if you're doing it well. I won't respect it if you're doing it poorly. And so you can have 12 black belts tied around your waist. And if you're a loser as a human being, if you're a goof as a human being, if you suck as a human being, if you're the devil as a human being, you can tie on the 13th black belt and I still won't respect you. In fact, if you're the devil, I'll work directly against you. and you can put on a 14th black belt, and I'll work even harder to take you down. Because being a good person isn't reliant on a black belt. Being a good person kind of leads towards a black belt. But you got to keep in mind that the black belt doesn't make you who you are. Who you are is what makes the black belt. And so, the individual that you were talking about, Mark, I got all the respect for that person, because to me, that's living a good life.
Yeah, 100% agree with that. Todd, you got any thoughts on this?
The daily check-ins and the reflection on performance that day, and like Mark said, building out that trend. So I would surmise is that person taking the long view of how to improve over time and be efficient at doing it. And I think because the commitment, in most cases, the commitment to become a black belt in your chosen discipline or more than one is such a long time, it allows us to have the perspective that if I take these steps on a day-to-day basis, the outlook that I've got for 10 years from now, 20, 30, 40, is vastly different from if I'm just living the same day over and over and over again. We look back at times and those, when someone's training for 5 years, training for 10 years, it becomes such milestones in our journey. And before you know it, you're looking back going, Jesus, has it been 20 years or 25? I'm at 32 years or 35 years or 40 years, Sean, as you were saying. And we see that life has been built on incremental improvements and making sure that we're not diverting our flight path by a few degrees in the beginning to land in a totally different continent to where we expected to. Once people turn around, they have that path that they beat down behind them. I think it lends to knowing that you can do it again in different avenues, whether that's going to be parenting, whether it's going to be a different martial art, whether I decided to really go and focus on skiing, or shooting, or things that I certainly don't do at this point. So I think I find when I'm speaking to people that haven't had a pastime, a passion that they've dug in on for years, the idea that you've done something for 10 years is staggering to them. 20 years, they just think that you're obsessed and you must be giving up everything else in your life to continue this one holy pursuit that you've got. So I think the perspective that we get as we grow into black belts in different disciplines is helpful. I have said to several people that, it seems to be well accepted that the cells in our body regenerate every 7 years or so. So I've explained that my reference on this is that you might get a black belt in the year 2000, but you haven't regenerated completely until 2007 as that black belt practitioner, and so on and so forth. You could be a judo practitioner that has been doing it for 5 years and your body still hasn't regenerated completely. So everything that we're involved in these endeavors is long-term pursuit, far view thinking, for a better outcome when we get to whatever destination it is we're shooting for.
I really like that. Seb, what do you got?
Yeah, I'll jump on that train. I like it. It brings a variety of other things as well into question, which is that 10 years is going to happen anyways, and you're going to wake up and it'll just be gone, right? Like so, and now you'll be 10 years older. So not only is your time gone, but you're also 10 years older. That's problematic. But then also, as you are tallying up the micro wins, as you are, following up with what it is that you've identified and what it is that you need to be invested in to get better at, it just takes you one day to be better than yesterday. That's all it takes. And the next day, it takes you another day to be better again. And so, I'm not suggesting that the path is linear. You're always getting better every day, because you don't. Some days you just go backwards a bit, and other days you have like massive breakthroughs. But the fact is, as far as life is concerned, you are tarnishing or darkening that belt, with each day that passes, that you are doing something about it. So when adversity hits, or when things are happening, if all you ever do is to turn back and look at the massive outcomes you've accomplished in your life, you're going to be cheating yourself out of the tracking history of all of the things that you've invested in, that you were successful in. And so now, if you start having a little the negative voices start chirping in your head, and your only reliance is on massive events, I got some bad news. It's not going to work the way you want it to. And so you have to be able to look back. And this is a concept that's very interesting. When and we've spoken about this before, when something happens in your life that's life threatening, all of the things that matter are the tiny little things, and a lot of them. It's not the big things. It's not the big life events that are massively changing. It's the little things. What was I, getting to do with the girls, like brushing their hair or whatever. We've spoken about this numerous times. And so those are some of the things that, when I was faced with the prospect of death in 2021, those are the things I was looking at, not the big, massive things. We tend to do that, though. And I think that's a disservice. And so just think of it this way: as you are investing in this process of tarnishing the belt and making it darker and darker, as you're engaging in life one day at a time, one step at a time, in the small things in all the different realms, you are actually proving to yourself that this is how you are. And so you don't need to overcompensate. You don't need to project. You don't need to do anything, because your character is grounded into truth, which is how you live your life on the daily. And that cannot be messed with, because if you don't believe who you are, you're not going to make anybody else believe who you are.
And then Seb drops the mic right at the end. You need a friggin' mic pass here with your arm. There you go. Toss it out the window. That's fantastic. Now we're at just about 2 hours here. I just can't thank you guys enough. This has just been a fantastic conversation. I think it's added more questions to my mind as what I consider a black belt than I had when I started this, and I'm loving it, because I'm going to be thinking about it all day. I had this little conversation with my kids at the table the other day, that, to your point, Seb, it's the little things that you're going to remember if you take the time to remember them. And it went like this. I was telling my wife that, when I was a kid, I got dropped off on a bus. And then I didn't get dropped off at a bus. I had to walk to the city bus, and I had to take the city bus to school. And then I had to walk to school. And at no point were my parents involved in me getting to school, other than the fact that telling me that I had to go. And my wife had a very similar experience. Growing up, she never got that little connection before school every day. But my boys, I drop them off at school every day. And I don't just drive to school, stop, and let them get out and go to school. I get out, I help them with their stuff, I get them to the door, I give them a hug, I tell them I love them, have a great day, and I knock them on the head or whatever, I give them a little shove or a shot in the arm or whatever, and off they go on their day. And I do that every day. Now, my boys aren't going to notice that, and they probably don't care right now. But in 30 years, when they're parents, they're going to be like, man, my dad dropped me off every single day. And it's those little daily drops in the bank, that little bit of darkening your belt, as you said, that's what makes you a black belt in life, I think, is consistently darkening that belt with your actions every day. So I can't thank you guys enough. This has just been an awesome conversation. Let's get some final thoughts. What makes a black belt, or anything that we've covered so far? Todd, I'm going to hit you first. What do you think?
Well, first, it's been a pleasure and honor to share some time with you, gentlemen. I've really enjoyed myself. My final thoughts, I would stress, if I was talking to my son, about the character that you should display both internally to yourself and present to the outside world in order to earn the symbol of that 2-inch piece of cloth. That is of paramount importance to me. If something were to happen where he was not physically able to perform at a technical level that I today would expect from somebody at 20 years old, that he should still internalize the character and integrity to be representative and be respectful in the community and deserving of respect of other people. That's of paramount importance to me as a black belt.
I love it. Seb, what are you thinking?
You know, we've spoken about a lot of things, and we've spoken about applying this black belt mindset to life. And I think one of the excuses that we hear all the time is, I don't have time to go below surface level in all of those things. There's too many things, and there's, you know, when you're inefficient, you're going to waste so much time doing things that you're going to be recuperating that time as you start diving deeper into things. And so I think it's important to recognize that, yes, there's a lot of things that we're going to be looking at, but if you're going to be around for 80 years and you're going to be doing it on a daily, it doesn't have to be a macro step forward. It could be micro movements towards betterment. And if they happen every day, once the effectiveness or the efficiency with which you proceed through those realms is going to make life more efficient. And when you do, then you'll have more time to invest in the things that are. And so it doesn't quite work the way that people think it does. Just as somebody that starts in a certain journey and uses all this power and aggression to do certain things and eventually finds a flowy path or an easier path that's more efficient, will find ways to do it without using that kind of energy. And so do not discount it on account of time. You have time. Take as much on as you can. Go below surface level.
Bam. I love it. Mark, final thoughts?
That's fantastic. I love that. The consistency, I think, is the key. I like that that visual of darkening your belt drip by drip. I really like that. I think the curiosity is essential to always be seeking ways to improve ourselves. The character, I equate that with integrity. Always conduct yourself with integrity. And I think that's what martial arts is a great system for that. It isn't the only system. I think, like Sean said, black belt in life, there's many other, but that mindset, for me, it has been martial arts, but it could be any number of things. And I just think that's what that's given to me has really helped me understand myself better. And that's what a black belt is. I think this has been a fascinating conversation, just because it was sort of started by somebody who was like, well, I can beat more people up than you can, so that's what a black belt is. And all the things we've talked about that have come from that has been really interesting for me. And I just think that like when Todd said, you earn your way into the symbol of that, right? But that's all a black belt is. It's a piece of fabric. It's a symbol, and applied correctly by the right people, it means all the things that we've talked about, and that's what it should mean. But it doesn't always. So don't automatically attribute it to it the level of respect, because it is only a symbol. But it's how you live your life, and that's why if you show up and watch that instructor instruct, you'll say, yeah, you'll know, even if you don't know anything about martial arts, you'll get that sense that guy's a real black belt, or a real solid purple belt. Like I don't care. It's not that. It's that symbol of those things that are character, their integrity, their consistency, their curiosity. They're all the things that we talked about. And this has been just excellent. I really appreciate time with you guys.
It's always a pleasure chatting with you. Sean, final thoughts?
So, I stirred up a little bit of turbulence during this one. So now I'm going to go way back to the start of the podcast, where I was kind of inferring that, if you're the 16-year-old karate star with a black belt, it doesn't really account for anything or amount to much. So I'm going to scrub that statement out now and just simply say that any martial art that leads towards a black belt is a good thing versus not. If you're not in a martial art, get in a martial art. And here's why. Because it should be a formal process that's structured, that leads you towards something that is going to teach you a lot about yourself. And if it's in a good school, what you'll learn is how to do life, not how to do karate. if it's a good school, what you'll learn to do is submit to life, not just submit on the mat. Martial arts is less about the karate punch, and it's more about knowing when to punch and when not to. Martial arts is a much higher level of consideration than just blasting someone at warp factor 3 across the mats. So get yourself involved or get your kids involved in a trajectory that will teach you about life. Once you've done it enough to get a black belt in whatever it is that you got it in, now you have the model to be successful in anything in life. How you do one thing is how you do everything. I've said that a bajillion times on the podcast, and I will continue to say it. The moment that I finish this podcast, I'll go and make a coffee. I've been roasting coffee for 20 years. I've been brewing coffee for 20 plus years. I know a thing or two about coffee. And it's not because when I was born, I wanted to be a coffee master. What I've wanted in life is to curiously pursue excellence in everything. How you do one thing is how you do everything. I was taught to be a black belt in something. I now can be a black belt in everything. That's how I think. That's how anyone can think. That's how everyone should think. And you'll understand that, what I just said, if you've started pursuing a black belt. So if you're not in the game, get in a game of pursuing a strip of cloth around your waist.
Bam. I like it. I don't have much to add except for the fact that I think I figured out your trifecta, Mark, for the C's, at least. We got curiosity, we got commitment, and courage. Because without those three things, you won't succeed. You need all three of those things to be.
I thought you were going to go with clarinet.
Clarinet, maybe. Maybe. But I do know some pretty awesome people that don't know how to play the clarinet. So, and I was going to say earlier, just a little bit ago, that, you know, the guitar is pretty nice to play. Just saying, it is pretty cool. So, by all means, I really do. Again, I appreciate this conversation. It has just been awesome. I think it's going to make a lot of people think a little bit differently than any other way. Look at that. Mark's got his guitar too. Look at that, Sean. I think you're
Boys, you should just get your guitars and play a little jingle jangle jingle for the finish of the show. Maybe the outro is you jingling.
Ooh, there we go. That'd be a way to do it. But I think,
can you guys play Stairway to Heaven?
I can't. No, I'm sorry. I can't play well. That's the thing. But I can still play. That's the key. So again, I really do thank you guys. So as we all continue to learn, build, and grow, we'll see y'all next week. Chimo. Thanks everybody for watching and being part of the collective. If this has sparked any thoughts or resonated with you, let us know in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Your support helps us grow and keeps the conversation going. We'll see y'all